Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I've been going out with a girl, her name is Julie, but last night she said to me when we were watching telly.
Philip's in Burton-on-Trent. Philip, what would you like to say?
I found it really just a couple of things. One is to correct something you said earlier.
Oh, always welcome.
And I'd love to borrow your crystal ball, because you said we need to have absolutely chapter and verse, I can't remember the exact words, but you said absolutely chapter and verse. If we do leave and it's WTO, then we need that absolutely nailed down. Well, and you said, but we don't need to do that for staying, because we know what it'll be. It's exactly what it is now. Well,
The day after the vote, it will be exactly as it was the day before.
But we don't know what.
Well, that's what I meant. I've clarified it for you now. So, what was the thing you wanted to correct me about?
So, because I think it's a bit sleight of hand. Because actually, if we're going to stay, we need chapter and verse about what staying is, and what will be changing, what won't be changing in the future.
We don't know that, do we? We can agitate for it, but in terms of what happens the day after we vote, if you voted to remain, it will be the same as it was the day before. If you voted to leave, everything's up in the air.
If you vote to remain, you don't know what you're voting for, because we don't know what it's going to be like in the future.
Yes, but we'll be involved in deciding what it's like in the future.
Not necessarily.
Well, yes, necessarily.
In a sort of pseudo sort of way.
Not in a sort of pseudo sort of way, for precisely the reasons that they're now complaining. We'd be giving up our powers by going for the Chequers deal, the powers we would use to influence the future of the European Union, the powers that the hard Brexiters are complaining that they're set to lose under the Chequers deal. So what was it you wanted to correct me about?
Because when I heard you on the radio, you said that a vote for staying in is...
a vote for the status quo.
But it isn't the status quo.
Of course it's the status quo, you silly sausage. It's exactly the same as things were yesterday, with the freedom to mould a new and even better future. So anyway, thanks for correcting me. Was there anything else you wanted?
Yeah, just to say that on the second referendum bit, my view is that if democracy is to mean anything in this country, then we have to implement the result, and then at a later stage, once that's been implemented, if you then want another referendum to say, do we want to rejoin, then that's how you do it.
But we won't. We'll have to rejoin with Schengen and the euro. There's no circumstances.
Yeah. But we'll end up with that anyway eventually.
No. Again, you've done it again. You see, you ring up to correct me, and then you make these. How would we end up in Schengen or the euro without voting to be in Schengen or the euro?
But that's because if you look at the way the politicians are voting now and ignoring democracy, they will go with what the EU wants.
So how are the politicians voting now to ignore democracy?
Because they are trying to thwart, and they're trying to stop having a clean
word,
Brexit.
Thwart. Okay, simple question for you, Philip, right? Here are three people, okay? One of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said we could be like Norway. One of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said that only an idiot would think of leaving the single market. And one of them believed the Brexit campaigner who said freedom of movement wouldn't be threatened in any way, shape or form. They all voted leave. None of them are getting what they voted for. So how is that democracy?
No, we should be getting what was promised.
Yes, but they were promised that we could be like Norway, and then him standing next to him was promised that freedom of movement would stay, and then him over there was promised there was no chance whatsoever that we were leaving the single market. They all voted leave. They all voted leave. How was that democracy?
But I wasn't promised that. I was promised that we would leave the EU.
Yes, but these three people voted to leave the EU because they believed freedom of movement would remain, that we would stay in the single market, and we could be like Norway. So they're not getting anything that they voted for. How is that democracy?
I don't remember any of that. Sorry, I wasn't told. People might have given opinions, but we weren't told if we voted we'd get the Norway solution.
Now, if Boris does get his way and Britain leaves, then what happens next? Well, one option is the UK could end up with an arrangement like Norway, as Boris Johnson and I were just talking about.
Hello, I'm Norman Tibbett. I want to tell you very briefly about the introduction you're going to see to a most extraordinarily interesting film, The Norway Option, which shows how Norway has conducted a successful relationship outside the European Union, but close to it.
Hello, good evening. Well, up until now, the Prime Minister has resisted firing the starting gun on the European referendum campaign. But maybe he was feeling frustrated, or maybe he just needed a decent speech to deliver on a trip to Iceland. Whatever motivated him, he waded into the fledgling argument by raising what is a most important question. We know, or will know, what it means to be in the EU, but what does out mean? It sounds so simple, but we'll do our best to disabuse you of any thought of that kind this evening. We're going to look at some different out scenarios. Now, the Prime Minister, as I say, is in Iceland, which is not in the EU, but just to confuse us, he talked about Norway.
David Cameron says he's strongly against the idea of Britain adopting looser ties with the EU in the way that Norway has. Some Eurosceptics argue that the country's a good example of how the UK could leave the EU but stay in the single market.
I mean, after all, Norway sells 75% of our overseas goods to countries that are members of the European Union without being a full member of it.
Funny you should mention Norway. I was just about to cite the Norwegian example of a good reason for staying in. The Norwegians all say, if you go to Norway, that they get all the disadvantages and none of the advantages.
It's one of the clever arguments that gets put out.
Well, no, this is what Norwegians say themselves.
Well, that's what some Norwegians say. Yes, the Norwegians, buying and selling from a single market, have to comply with legislation over which they haven't had a say. But, you know, the Norwegians have no ties in terms of foreign policy with the European Union. They have no ties in terms of their fishing industry, where they have a 200-mile limit. They are opted out and exempted from all the things that really make the British mad.
Countries such as Norway and Switzerland have thrived outside of the European Union, but still have strong trading links with the EU member countries. Should the UK follow suit?
Should we follow the example of Norway and Switzerland, have strong trading links and thrive outside the European Union? OK, well, we'll bring in Nigel Farage on that, and then I'll come to some other speakers. Nigel Farage.
Well, I have to say that everybody from David Cameron to half this panel say, wouldn't it be terrible if we were like Norway and Switzerland? Really? They're rich, they're happy, they're self-governing.
We're told Britain's not big enough. She couldn't possibly survive on her own and make her own trade deals. And people say, well, actually, Norway, Iceland and Switzerland do pretty well. Ah, yeah, but they're ghastly little countries. I mean, this disparagement of these countries is extraordinary. Look, Norway, let's just sort of get a couple of things here right, shall we? You know, the Prime Minister saying how ghastly Norway is. They're rich. They top the world's happiness index. They're allowed to catch their own fish. And they've made their own trade relationship with Europe, which suits them.
But they have to pay he would say they'd have to pay the cash and have none of the decision-making power.
Well, that is straightforward untrue, because actually they don't pay their money to Brussels, they pay their money directly to some of the poorer emerging southern and eastern European countries. And do you know why they do it? They choose to do it, and perhaps because they're a lot richer than us, they're able to do it. So that's not true. We're told Norway doesn't have a seat at the top table. Oh, yes, it does. Norway sits at the World Trade Organization. We don't. Britain doesn't. We're represented by somebody who's there from the European Union. We're told that Norway has to accept all the rules. Oh, no, they don't. Oh, no, they don't. When the Postal Services Directive came out, you know, the one that effectively closed hundreds of post offices all over Britain, the Norwegians said, no, we're vetoing it. So the Norwegians retain the right of veto.
So you think, with a phrase that has become current this week, the Brexit dream is dying, yes?
No, I don't actually agree with that, because there are many different dreams when it comes to Brexit. And there are many different ones we could end up with. I recall at one stage in the debate during the referendum, which was quite common to hear people say we could be like Norway. We could be in the EEA. That's one possibility. Donald Tusk at one point held out the possibility of a grand free trade deal like Canada. There's also even the possibility of no deal, which is described as doomsday, but 90-odd-something% of the world's trade in goods is done by WTO rules. There are other alternatives. Ironically, the government seems to have talked itself into backing what could turn out to be the worst alternative.
We're saying that.
What is wrong with Norway? What is wrong with Switzerland? We were told repeatedly that we could be like them. I know people. I speak to them. They ring the programme. They voted to leave the European Union because they believed that there was no chance of leaving the single market. They believed that we could be like Norway. They believed that freedom of movement wouldn't be affected. That's why they voted. How is that democracy? Because they're not getting any of it.
I'm sorry. I don't understand.
You can say that again. It's 11:16.
Can you get on board with Justine Greening, former Education Secretary, with her suggestion that it's time to consider a second vote on whether we stay in or leave the European Union? It would be a three-way choice, run like a mayoral election, and the three choices that you would have would be no deal, which Theresa May insists is still a possibility. The Chequers deal, which Theresa May insists is still a possibility. And no Brexit at all, which she says is not going to happen. Brexit means Brexit. And she also said today there is not going to be a referendum on Brexit under any circumstances. Can you conceive of one? 0345 6060 973. Elizabeth in Clacton-on-Sea. Hello, can you?
No, I cannot. Good afternoon, Sheila. I think Miss Greening's proposals are pathetic. Can we just all get over the fact that we voted to leave? All these Remainers are really annoying people. They're really annoying me. And especially Mrs May. I saw her yesterday speaking to Andrew Marr, and she said the EU said no to one of our proposals, so she caved in and wouldn't carry on with one of our proposals. Well, why didn't she just stand up and say, well, OK, you say no, we're off, bye-bye. We will not be giving you £40 billion.
Well, because she says she's in negotiations and she's bringing other things back to the table next time.
Well, let's wait and see what happens in Parliament this afternoon. But regarding having...
elaborate on that. What you think it'll be blown out the water, do you?
Yes, I do. And I do vote Conservative, but I won't vote for her anymore. And may I say, having another referendum on in or out is absolutely ridiculous. What's it going to be? The best of three?
But it isn't in or out, is it? It's two out options and one in option.
Well, Sheila, we voted out.
I know. And like I said at the very beginning, I had come to accept that that's what was going to happen. You know, on either side, it's not been a difficult thing to absorb, has it? The whole 2 years that we've experienced, let alone the vote when it began. But the reality, if as you've just predicted, the Chequers deal is blown out of the water either today or by 1,000 cuts, and then ultimately by the EU. Where exactly does that leave Britain, Elizabeth? Are you prepared to sanction the idea of no deal?
Yes, I am, Sheila, because we need somebody with a bit of backbone to stick up for this country.
Now, the EU has urged all member states and stakeholders to prepare for the doomsday scenario that Britain crashes out of Europe without a Brexit deal. There are all sorts of warnings about what that could mean, from hundreds of thousands of job losses to plummeting investment and huge border delays. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, looks at what the impact could be and what contingency plans are in place.
Could this be the kind of chaos we're in line for come March 29th next year if there's no deal? Trucks bumper to bumper at Dover, customs checks grinding to a halt.
The no's to the left, 307.
So far, Brexit has mostly been slugged out in Westminster. But with government infighting and a series of high-profile resignations, the prospect of crashing out of Europe with no deal is fast becoming a credible reality.
So what does this mean for our weekly shop? Do we face missing out on foods like avocados, parmesan, olive oil? And does a no-deal Brexit mean that some of these foods will disappear from our supermarket shelves?
Iain Wright, who runs the UK's food and drink trade body, says UK shoppers could face food shortages.
We import 40% of our food in this country, and that isn't finished goods, it's ingredients. Choice will be eroded, and some of the brands and foods that people have grown to love will not be available or will be much more expensive. I think it could be very grisly, actually, in the weeks before a hard Brexit, and in the immediate aftermath. It could be very, very unfortunate.
And it's not just food and drink that could get stuck. In a no-deal scenario, aeroplanes could be grounded without a new agreement on air traffic control. The European Commission says UK pharma companies won't get to test medicines. Insurance policies won't be able to pay out to tens of millions of customers. And $26 trillion of financial derivatives will no longer be valid.
And I'd just also like to say that we've signed Article 50, and we're no longer under any obligation to take any new laws or directions from the EU, but she caves in over everything. And I think it's getting out of hand, all this Remainers and their...
So the Chequers, is it the detail of the Chequers deal that bothers you?
Well, yes, because we're still going to be taking their rules and regulations. That is not what she said in her speeches. This is the problem.
Well, she said yesterday on customs, for example, that a lot of that is rules and regulations we're happy to keep because they're about mutual standards.
But if the EU came out with another one of their directives or rules, we would have to abide by it. Why? Why can't you?
We wouldn't. Parliament could override it, but
and
then
how long will that take?
Well, and she also added in the paper that there would be consequences, and arguably those consequences, as you probably know, Elizabeth, would be to make it harder to do trade deals with other nations.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Yeah, so for you, there are only two options, which is...
I think there shouldn't be any more options. We should get rid of the wet lettuce and put somebody in charge who believes in this country and believes in what we voted for. And all these Remainers really, really want to get a grip of that.
And who might that be?
Well, as it goes, I would either have David Davis or I would have, believe it or not, Boris.
OK, I'll believe it. Thank you. You and Donald Trump. Elizabeth, thank you. Elizabeth in Clacton-on-Sea. Helen in Leicester, how do you see it?
Oh, Sheila, good afternoon.
Hello.
I am a first-time caller, and I'm fascinated by some of the calls over the last year or so. I've actually tuned into LBC. Really, just my own opinion. To me, we voted to be a democratic country, and if we voted at the polls to leave, then we really should believe in what we've done. Yes, I think everybody's more aware now through the journalism and through the radio and TV, but to me, I think we have to stick to our guns, and if we have to come to it, a no deal. I think we're a very, very strong country.
But you're not concerned about the everybody's more aware thing, are you?
I am.
So why not give people a chance to think again if that's what they want? And if it's not what they want, great, we still leave, even if it's the catastrophe of a no deal.
I think you're right to a certain point, but the difference is that won't really change, because the difference is we're putting too much on the table, and people still don't understand it. I think what people really meant was what we said, to totally leave.
The problem with, it's a bit like, Donald Trump says what he means and all of that, and then when you dig down, he doesn't ever really say what he means. And when, I don't want to go too much onto Trump because we're going to talk about him too, but the reason I made that comparison is you just said there, Helen, that, the information is confusing, or was to that effect, that there's so much to take into account. When politicians try and boil it down, they all seem to say, the same handful of things. Theresa May, for example, is saying that her apparently terribly flawed Chequers deal delivers on the Brexit that people voted for. Jacob Rees-Mogg says it does nothing of the sort. Boris Johnson, David Davis say it does nothing of the sort. So, so what I'm saying is you have to decide for yourself. We all have to decide for ourselves as voters which of them is telling us the truth.
Well, the difference is what Theresa May did on that day. She could have done that 2 years ago, which we all knew that. It didn't take one day to come up with those kind of policies. That should have been done. We know that. It's done and dusted. The difference is, to me, I think this country, there are many people believe in what I think, as in we all think this way. Let's leave and let's stand on our own 2 feet. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, let's do it. Why not? We might be tough for a few years, but I tell you what, deep down, this country will grow and prosper like you've never seen it before.
But you know why it's taken 2 years, don't you?
I know why, because people have been putting in the pot their own personal opinion, not what really is good for this country. The difference is they haven't been strong enough to say we don't want immigration at the mass of Europe of 500 million. They don't want that, and we couldn't afford it in this country, and we ain't got the size of country to put it 500 million. We can't even have Turkey in it.
So, but if it's that simple, you've that simple. Well, it isn't, is it? Because you said, we've got 40 years of deeply embedded joint legislation and joint connections, Helen. I mean, common sense tells you that you don't just cut those with a knife.
Well, I think you can, Sheila. Personally, I think you can unravel it.
Well, I hope if that happens, you survive the fallout, Helen. Thank you, Helen in Leicester. Is Donald Trump meeting with his counterpart in Helsinki, Vladimir Putin, or his handler? Timely enough, Nick Cohen, the journalist, has tweeted in response to a tweet from Jesse Rodriguez commenting on a statement from the German foreign minister, who says we can no look in light of the EU is our foe statement. The German foreign minister has said we can no longer completely rely on the White House. That's from Jesse Rodriguez. And Nick Cohen says Donald Trump now agrees with Putin so completely he might as well be a Russian asset. The whole basis of our national security is in doubt. We should stop Brexit until we've worked out where we are and where the world is going. It's becoming increasingly obvious that the world of 2016 is dead. 03456060973. Let me simplify the question, because we don't know, do we? We haven't got enough evidence in front of us as to whether Donald Trump, things look a certain way quite often, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are a certain way. We can't say whether Donald Trump, yet anyway, whether Donald Trump knew of interference during the election and allowed the Russians to help him. We don't know that he knew that. We don't know that happened. But we do know what he said, and we do know what he's done in public. There are things we do know. And on the basis of them, not least the comments since last Friday, really, since the EU summit, and then Thursday, since the EU summit and the statements here in the UK, both in the interview with The Sun, for example, and then at that press conference in Chequers, and subsequently last night on the beach in Scotland, saying that the EU is a foe. Is Donald Trump simply today in Helsinki a gift to Vladimir Putin? 03456060973, the number to call. Text 84850 or tweet at LBC. Paul in Manchester, is he a gift to Putin?
Hello, Sheila. No, he's not a gift at all. He's not a gift. Well, in terms of world peace, he's an absolute gift, yes, but in terms of you think he's going into some sort of Vladimir Putin playbook, then no, not at all. And in terms of the collusion that your previous guest was talking about in the elections, there was none at all. If people go and have a look at blackboxvoting.org, they'll find out exactly how electronic voting works and how they can and can't interfere with electronic voting, because they don't have so much paper ballot voting as we do in Britain over there. So it's very difficult for them to tamper those systems, Sheila.
So you think he's sincerely gone to Helsinki? He's mentioned nuclear a lot. It was mentioned in the nuclear power. He mentioned, let me be clear, military power, nuclear weapons. Yeah. He mentioned it in the press conference in Chequers. He's mentioned it again in that brief statement he gave this morning before the meeting with Putin. Do you believe that's the overarching reason for his visit?
Well, there are various ones. Obviously, it's trade primarily, isn't it? Because look at the mess that's being made of the EU with this whole faux business. It's a smokescreen, isn't it? They try to mess up the whole EU situation. They're calling them a foe. Why would you got to ask the question?
No, he's calling them a foe.
Yes, exactly. He's calling them a foe, but that's against the backdrop of they were actually challenging him over the trade war. They were saying that they'd gone bonkers in Brussels. The fact that he said, right, we're going to have to raise our tariffs against Europe now. They've gone bonkers because they're used to the CAP and all sorts of subsidies, aren't they, from Brussels? Now, back to your question about the nuclear aspect. Well, Syria is a hotbed. That has to be de-escalated very, very quickly, because that could have kicked off very, very easily. And then back to your question before.
Well, it kind of has for 7 years, hasn't it?
Has what?
Kicked off.
Well, it's kicked off, yes, because of oil pipelines. That's an economic war. That's got nothing whatsoever to do with migrants or religion. That's all about economics and bringing pipelines up from Saudi up through Europe to cut off the Russian supply pipe that comes from Siberia into Germany. That's an economic war. That's the backdrop to that. Now, the nuclear question is...
Not entirely, but anyway.
Well, it is. But partly, as you can say, there are multi-assets. When you say, back to your original question, is he a gift? Then it depends on which aspect you're going to cherry pick. And the answer is no, because at the end of the day, Sheila, we need world peace. We want to make sure that this whole situation de-escalates.
So you've got faith in the guy to create...
Oh, absolutely.
Despite all the evidence we have about Putin's behaviour, you think...
There isn't any evidence about Putin's, but there's no evidence. The whole Novichok-Salisbury thing, that was a false flag. The whole thing about collusion in America, that's false flag. Sheila, don't be sucked in by the mainstream media. Go do your research on the internet. There's plenty of alternative sources of media out there now where people, and I hope they do, go onto the internet and they find out for themselves that the line they're being spun by mainstream media is complete hokum.
Have you been to the border between Ukraine and and Russia?
Well, that's the George Soros vehicle, isn't it?
No, hang on. Before you just go into borderline anti-Semite mode, have you been to the border? Have you been to the border?
What did you make that statement for? Based on what assumption did you make that one, Sheila?
Based on throwing George Soros randomly into any argument about anything. If we talked about my shopping list at the weekend, you'd probably throw George Soros.
No, but that was a slur on my
but can you answer my question? Can you answer my question about you're asking...
Well, if you'd like to rephrase it without the insult...
You're telling me, try not to mention George Soros, you're telling me...
Why shouldn't we mention George Soros? He's bankrolling the ferries across the Mediterranean, is he not? Hasn't that been proved? That's the evidence, Sheila.
You have just said, do your research, Sheila. I'm asking you about your research. Have you been to the border between Ukraine and Russia?
For what purpose, Sheila?
Research.
To do what?
To find out what's going on there. To find out what's going on there. To find out exactly what Russia is doing there.
Syria and Turkey.
Have you been there? I have. I've been to both borders.
And your point being, well, what?
That you're getting all your research on articles about George Soros on the internet, and maybe you, before you stop banding around accusations that people need to do their research more, could just stop just pumping out tropes left, right and centre. But anyway, thank you for your call, I think.
On the same network, America's president offered support, claiming the probe into Russian interference was the real problem, not Putin.
I will tell you, it's driven a wedge between us and Russia. Maybe we've just knocked down that wedge, but it has driven a wedge. And President Putin said that. One of the early things he said when we started, he said, it's really a shame because we could do so much good.
On stage, he went even further, implying he believed the word of America's longtime adversary over his own intelligence aides.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
That sparked instant alarm among those listening in on Capitol Hill.
That was quite something, almost surreal at points, as the president was relitigating the election of 2016 and making the case again that there was no collusion.
Yeah, it's a stunning and disappointing revelation here today.
It was not a very forceful presentation from President Trump with Putin standing right next to him.
I don't know.
Not forceful at all.
I'll give the benefit of the doubt to maybe jet lag and time differences, but holy...
He should have defended his own intelligence community. Or just don't take the meeting. Don't go to Helsinki if you can't look the guy in the eye and tell him what's what.
We've never seen an American president do this, stand on a stage with a Russian, former KGB, and kind of compare our intelligence community to the Russians.
Today was a new low, even for Donald Trump.
He landed at night, and he won't have been happy with the verdict on his summit with President Putin if he woke up in time to watch his favorite morning show, Fox and Friends.
You're standing next to Vladimir Putin, whose ultimate goal in life is to undermine our democracy. So it was that one moment that you had to stand up for your own country, to stand up for your intelligence community. And as we've said this morning, he did not do that.
Unprecedented criticism from the channel that loves him.
Nobody's perfect, especially in 10 intense days of summits, private meetings, and everything on his plate. But that moment is the one that's going to stand out unless he comes out and corrects it.
On the opposite channel, a former CIA chief was more brutal.
What Mr. Trump did yesterday was to betray the women and men of the FBI, the CIA, NSA, and others, and to betray the American public. And that's why I use the term that this is nothing short of treasonous, because it is a betrayal of the nation. He is giving aid and comfort to the enemy, and it needs to stop.
May I give this to you to look at, sir?
Back to Fox, where a rigorous interviewer tried to hand President Putin the indictments of 12 Russian intelligence officers charged with interfering in the U.S. elections.
Start answering your question with something a little bit different.
He never did answer the question. In the Senate, the Democrats were asking what exactly did the two presidents talk about in their private meeting, and why did Mr. Trump seem so keen to please Mr. Putin?
President Trump's actions yesterday lead many more Americans to suspect that something was amiss, that there may have been collusion. What else would explain President Trump's actions and protestations.
Even the congressional speaker from President Trump's own party criticized him, although without actually mentioning his name.
Vladimir Putin does not share our interests. Vladimir Putin does not share our values. We just conducted a year-long investigation into Russia's interference in our elections. They did interfere in our elections. It's really clear. There should be no doubt about that.
Well, he's the leader who describes himself as a very stable genius. But yesterday, Donald Trump admitted he'd made a mistake. His rare admission of error was prompted by the backlash against his summit with Vladimir Putin, after which he was accused of disgraceful and shameful behavior by members of his own party. The president said he misspoke when he said he couldn't see why Russia would have interfered in the US election. He said he meant to say wouldn't. Sky's Cordelia Lynch reports from Winchester in Virginia, where voters told her they back their president despite the row.
And we start.
With a script in hand, Donald Trump tries to limit the damage of his off-the-cuff comments in Helsinki. But soon, a fitting flash of the unpredictable.
I have a full faith in our intelligence agencies. Whoops, they just turned off the light. That must be the intelligence agencies.
Once back on message, he tried to clarify his comments on Russian meddling. Yesterday, clear in his support of Vladimir Putin.
He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
Today, he tried to walk back his words. Well, one word, to be precise.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia.
Iain is in Beaconsfield. Iain, what would you like to say?
Well, this is monumental, isn't it? I start by saying I think to assume that Trump is naive and some kind of Russian stooge is in itself naive. And I don't believe, I think there was, I mean, it was clear there was Russian support for Trump before the election. And I don't think that's really a bad thing, to be honest. I feel that these two men have found common ground. And what I mean by that is they realise what the EU and the globalist liberal establishment really are and what they stand for, and they're determined to prevent it carrying on with its agenda. And I think this is what this is all about, really. The illusion is crumbling, and they're standing up to these people. They've had a stranglehold on Western democracies for the last 50 years or so. And if people want to really understand what the EU is really all about, they should look on YouTube for Britain on the Brink, introduced by Sir Patrick Moore. And it explains in very frank and concise detail exactly what the EU project is. And it's frightening.
You know,
I think
you're sounding like a conspiracy theorist, and we're not talking about the EU, we're talking about Trump and Putin. Do you think it was? Yeah, do you think that Russia interfered in the American election?
It's possible. It is possible, yeah. I mean, I'm taking this at face value at the moment, but that's the point really is that I think these two people have found common ground. They see the EU and Europe as a threat. Sorry, not Europe, the EU. They're very different things. They see them as a threat, you know, to international trade, to relations, to democracy, because the way the liberal establishment work, which is an oxymoron in itself, because I think liberty is the last thing on their mind, is they need an enemy. You know, and this is what they've done over the last few decades.
And you don't think Trump is acting in that way? He's created a lot of enemies, hasn't he?
No, but you're talking about personal stuff and you know, national politics, and this is different. This is the global stage. What the liberal establishment have done is create an enemy in Russia, and I don't believe that, you know, Russia.
Do you not think Russia's done quite a good job itself in making enemies of people with its behaviour over the last 10 years?
The stuff they've been accused of probably isn't even true.
Probably isn't it?
MH17. Did they shoot? Did the Russians shoot that down over Ukraine or not?
I don't know. I don't know enough about it to say yes or no. My instinct would say probably not.
Well, that tells me all I need to know.
It's worth saying that on the allegations made by members of the VoteLeave campaign against the Commission, that they didn't conduct the report properly, they didn't interview sufficient numbers of people, what the Electoral Commission says in response to that is that by the time well into the investigation, they had sufficient evidence that rules had been broken and that crimes had potentially been committed. Some other members of the VoteLeave campaign came forward to give evidence, but they decided they didn't need to interview them. I think that's. I'd like to know more about that decision personally. Just interview anyone who comes forward with information, I would have thought, but maybe that's not how it works. The Electoral Commission has declared that the VoteLeave campaign, that was the official campaign to leave the European Union, with some very leading Conservative figures and some leading Labour figures like Kate Hoey involved, has broken the rules, has significantly broken the rules on electoral law. Now, it was interesting, we spoke earlier on to John Curtis, the Professor Sir John Curtis now, a Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. He says because it was an advisory election, no matter what any other politician chooses to tell you, it's up to Parliament whether or not to take advice from the referendum itself. The Commission, the Electoral Commission, has no particular stance to declare the vote was null and void. All they can do is fine VoteLeave or anyone else they find to have broken the rules and get the police to prosecute. And even in a general election, he thinks they would now be out of time. If you discover something that's particularly strong, there is still a time limit. What do you say should happen now to VoteLeave? 0345 6060 973 is the number. Jonathan's call from Bishop Stortford. Hi, Jonathan.
Oh, hello. Yes, good afternoon, Sheila. What I'd like to say is the fact that, yes, I mean, obviously, I think there were some skullduggery on both sides of this at the time. And obviously, you're centring on particularly the VoteLeave, which I suppose you're right to do. But realistically, this is all about the whole centre point of all this is the fact it was a democratic vote. And the fact the amount of money thrown at something isn't going to make any more people vote for it or vote less.
But to be honest with you, the democracy of a vote isn't just, I mean, it is largely about how the people vote, but it isn't just about how the people vote. It's also about the conditions in which that vote takes place.
Yes, but this whole debacle that we're going through with Mrs May, who quite frankly just needs to go. She just needs to just remove herself and do us all a favour, because she's made a complete cock-up of it, let's be honest. That's the only word you could use.
Of Brexit?
Excuse me? Sorry?
Of it? By it, you mean Brexit?
Of the whole... Well, it's deliberate, really, because she's a staunch Remainer. She never wanted to make a success of it. It was deliberate so that we would say, oh, OK, Mrs May, you made such a mess of it, so we won't bother anyway, which is really what her grand plan was anyway. And also, I think you need to centre on why she broke parliamentary rules, as Mogg has pointed out, going to Mrs Merkel before her own government with her white paper at Chequers. So you're not saying anything about that, are you?
Well, we have talked extensively about the white paper, and we are going to again too. It was actually, hang on, Jonathan, before you start accusing us of ignoring things. It was actually going to be my lead story today, but because of events in the Commons at 10 to 1, we decided to change the lead story. So there you go.
Well, no one's accusing anyone of anything, Sheila, just pointing out there's faults on both sides, and I think you need to represent that. The Remain side are not clear of blame, and they shouldn't be done so in any way.
What did they do? I've got in front of me what the Electoral Commission found that they did. The official Remain campaign, Britain Stronger in Europe, was fined £1,250 last year for not providing some invoices and for declaring some spending in aggregate rather than an... Let me finish. Well, hang on. Please let me finish a point, Jonathan, before you... Your whole approach seems to be telling me what I'm not doing, and then when I start to do it, you won't let me finish.
No, not at all. No, you're often accused of doing that.
£1,250 fined for not declaring certain invoices. That's a slightly different claim by the Electoral Commission, isn't it, than an overspend of £675,000 funnelled into a different group that it should never have been organised, coordinating with in the first place. Slightly different scale, isn't it?
Well, yes, but you would say that because you're a staunch Remainer.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying it because of anything. I'm saying it because it's a fact.
Well, no, but your programmes are very angled towards what you presenters personally think, which is where I personally think.
I don't think they did that. The Electoral Commission is telling us that they did that.
Yes, but it's all water under the bridge. We need to deal with this now, Sheila. This is all just talk. You know, this is what the good government are good at, just talking.
What? All right, let me just ask you this. Let me ask you this then, Jonathan.
Nothing.
Let me ask you this. What level of wrong would make you think, actually, that election isn't valid? What would have to happen for you to think, you know, for you to be less relaxed about it?
The main level of wrong, Sheila, let's be quite honest, the first one that comes to mind is that we put a staunch Remainer in charge of Brexit, and she's deliberately...
No, but that's after the fact. Before the fact, just give me a sense. Forget Brexit for a second. Just imagine it's an election about apples. What level of wrongdoing, in your mind, would make an election void?
Well, you're trying to say that they've been dishonest, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm separating it entirely from the events of today and the events of Brexit. I'm trying to get a sense where you, and therefore others who call in as well, I'm trying to get a sense where you draw the line and stop being relaxed about people breaking the rules during elections. What would be too much? I mean, for example, would collusion with Russia be too much?
Well, of course, yes.
Remember this man? Aaron Banks is, they say, Britain's biggest ever political donor.
I've decided today to donate £1 million to the party and not the 100,000 we originally agreed.
Aaron Banks is a vehicle insurance millionaire who reportedly gave £12 million to the Leave campaign. He's also been dogged by allegations about his ties with the Russian state.
In 252 days, Britain will Brexit after a stunning referendum campaign won by the Leavers. The man who paid more than anyone towards that victory is Aaron Banks, millionaire friend of Nigel Farage, supporter of Donald Trump, and, it turns out, a man who spent much more time with Russians than he cared to admit. From first admitting to a single boozy lunch with the Russian ambassador, a series of leaked emails forced him to admit to many more meetings and offers of gold and diamond deals with Russian businessmen. Tonight, we have uncovered court documents from months before the newspaper revelations, which raise further questions. Mr. Banks says one source of his wealth is diamond mining in southern Africa. We've been to see those mines and obtained court documents lodged in a dispute with his former business partner, who alleges Mr. Banks sought investment in Russia for the mines, which were struggling financially. The allegations raise new questions about Mr. Banks' links to Russia at a time when many are asking questions about possible meddling in Brexit.
That's a different subject entirely, Sheila, and let's not go down that route.
It's the same subject. I'm trying to give you solid examples because you don't seem able to tell me where you would draw a line. I think over £500,000 of overspending and cooperating with another organisation that you're precluded from cooperating with is a line that's crossed.
Yeah, the line is people not doing what they should do, which is where I started, where the government never wanted to deliver Brexit, and that was a line they crossed, which is why we're in the mess we're in now, which is why we're having conversations, which is why people have done things probably they shouldn't have done, including the government, who have been totally unhonest about the whole thing. So they've crossed the line. They've crossed a very important line. And Mrs. May is staunchly dishonest.
And you can vote her out in a couple of years' time.
I would love to. Today, please.
Yeah, but we can't. But we can't.
5 minutes would be good.
But we can't have another referendum, even though there was wrongdoing.
Mrs. May is the whole problem here. This is what
she wasn't Prime Minister at the time.
I need to understand. She has mismanaged this.
But she wasn't Prime Minister at the time of the referendum.
Sorry?
She wasn't Prime Minister at the time of the referendum.
No,
you can't blame her for the events during the referendum, can you?
You're talking about things that shouldn't happen, Sheila, and crossing the line.
During elections.
Well, she made a mistake there. That cost her very badly, and it nearly cost her. She never nearly got the job. But, I mean, where she crossed the line was she never wanted to deliver Brexit.
All right, Jonathan, thank you. We're going round in circles, I think. Thank you for your call. Jonathan in Bishop Stortford.
Dave's in Brentwood. Dave, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. How you doing?
I'm good, Dave. What's on your mind?
I'm not going to get involved in a very high-level intellectual argument with you because I'm probably not clever enough.
Don't be ridiculous.
What I will say, surely it would be better for the students to put up something, some form of counter-argument to create a discussion about it.
There's no argument with if. If's not a poem that is problematical in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, but surely if you're just shutting it down, it's not surely free speech.
It's their wall.
Both ways.
Well, free speech doesn't mean I can come and do graffiti on your bedroom wall, mate.
But...
Does it? Or maybe it does. Can I come around now?
Well, yeah, why not? But this isn't their bedroom wall, is it? It's
Well,
an open,
no,
free
it's
public
their
space.
social space. It's their student union, and the students decided they didn't want the poem. I mean, what business is that of yours or mine?
But what happens if there were students who had...
Don't do what happens if. We're talking about this story. We're not talking about one that you've just made up.
Well, it always seems that free speech is only acceptable if they...
But we've just established, Dave, that free speech in this context would allow me to write whatever I wanted on your kitchen wall. That's not free speech.
But we're being... You have to be tolerant of the people who are being...
Well, you have to be tolerant of what I write on your kitchen wall, then.
Come round and write it, James. I would be. But
Don't
free
be
speech,
silly.
it needs to work both ways.
What do you mean it needs to work both ways?
Any form of free speech is acceptable so long as it agrees with the Liberals.
What do you mean, the Liberals? It's a poem that they don't want on their wall. So I like you, Dave, and I don't want you to go away because, I mean, you realise now that this free speech argument is utterly ridiculous, and you realise now that you've used the word liberal as an insult when liberal means a belief in freedom. But what I'd love you to tell me...
This is why I opened the conversation with explaining my lack of intelligence.
Well, I don't like people describing... Don't describe yourself as unintelligent, because you're clearly not. But you have felt the little stirrings of anger about this story, and I want you to tell me why, because it's nothing to do with...
I got anger about many of hundreds of stories going on at the moment, but as soon as I mention anything, people just shut you down of being racist, right-wing...
But they don't, mate, because this is on page 31 of the second best-selling newspaper in the whole country, so the idea that this kind of attitude, your attitude, is being stifled is palpably absurd. So when you heard that some students in Manchester had painted a wall in their student union, tell me, in as many words as you want, or as few words as you want, why you cared.
I cared enough to ring you up because I feel passionate about it. I would never read the Daily Mail because I don't read that kind of stuff.
No, that's not what I asked you. I asked you when you heard that some students had painted a wall in Manchester, a room you're never going to go in, and a poem that you either know about or don't know about. Why did you care?
Because I cared enough because I thought, oh, that's typical of students. You wouldn't get it if it was in a white van meeting, would you? White van man.
You wouldn't get what, Dave?
Well, you wouldn't get a load of white van men writing on, covering up and allegedly, okay, in your words, a poem that people can disagree with because it doesn't agree with today's...
No, this poem is utterly unproblematical. It's some of the other stuff that Rudyard Kipling wrote is racist. It's white supremacist, and that was a commonplace attitude in the 19th century. So, what do you mean wouldn't get...
That's going to be written out of history one day, isn't it?
No, well, so you're worried again about things that aren't happening.
Because they are...
You think Rudyard Kipling is going to be written out of history? You think they're going to remove... No, Dave, you can't. You just keep talking. It doesn't mean you're thinking. Here's the point. Why did you care about a room in Manchester you've never been in being painted by some students who decided what they wanted on their own wall? How have you ended up being so manipulated that you think this matters?
It's not a case of being manipulated.
Oh, it is, Dave.
You're very, very clever, Mr. O'Brien.
No, I'm not, Dave. I just asked really simple questions, and I'm asking you one now. Why did you care about this wall?
Really simple questions.
Why did you care about this wall in Manchester? Why?
Because it's just the small thing that's going to go on to bigger things.
Well, like what, though, Dave?
Well, like taking down Winston Churchill's statues, like shutting down Winston Churchill's cafe.
When is that? No, Winston Churchill's cafe hasn't been shut down. Some silly people protested about it, and then other people can turn around and say...
Right to feel they can do that?
Well, because you just said freedom of speech was important, Dave.
Yeah, freedom of speech is important, but...
Well, hang on, you just said what gives them the right to protest? The answer to the question is the thing you rang in to defend, freedom of speech, Dave.
I understand that, but...
Right. So why do you care? Because all I want you to do is not care. All I want you to do is let go of this bolus of anger that is inside you about some kids...
Because you have to care both ways. I would care if it was done, if it was something that was very, what do you call it? What's the word? Communism.
So you've got... So you think there's two sides here? And you think that the anti-racists are allowed to paint their wall, but the racists wouldn't be allowed to put up their racist stuff. That's what you've ended up arguing.
Wouldn't even be allowed to open their mouth.
Oh, Dave, I thought you were going to deny that. So what you're cross about is the fact that you're not allowed to be racist in public, but you are allowed to be anti-racist.
No, not racist.
What then, mate?
Not even racist.
What then, mate?
Racism is just a word that gets bandied around.
No, it isn't just Dave, racism isn't just a word that gets bandied around. Racism is an ideology that teaches your ethnicity or your skin colour colour somehow defines your value. So, I mean, you might want to think...
Ideology. We'll be discussing the other one, which you would instantly discuss me and probably shut me down for being Islamophobic.
Well,
why is a word that doesn't even exist.
So why have we gone there now, you see? So, I mean, I know this isn't your intention, but you are cross about a wall in Manchester being painted because you don't like Muslims. How has that happened, Dave?
I haven't mentioned Muslims.
Well, what's Islamophobia then?
What's Islam? It's like
what do you call people that follow Islam?
Islamists. But if I was to say anything for or against that, I would be right.
So you're cross about a wall in Manchester being painted over, a poem by Rudyard Kipling that you weren't previously aware of, because you feel that you're not allowed to say vile things about Muslims.
You're not allowed to say anything about Muslims.
So you're agreeing with me then?
Anything.
That's why you're cross.
You're not allowed to say. You're not.
Mate,
allowed to say
I am
anything.
so grateful to you. I really am. I didn't think you'd be that honest.
I'm not saying you're condescending or patronising, Mr. O'Brien, but...
mate, you can't. You can own condescending and patronising. They're just words. I'm happy to see you exercising your freedom of speech, but to come on national radio and say, I'm cross about some students painting a wall in Manchester because I feel that I'm not allowed to say disgusting things about Muslims in public.
No, James,
that's
take
incredible.
out the word disgusting. You need to take out the word disgusting.
So what is it? What are the things you think you're not allowed to say then, Dave?
You're not allowed to say anything about
Go on, say something that you think you're not allowed to say.
You're just trying to get me to say something that I really shouldn't say.
No, just say it, Dave. Say it, Dave. It's the only way you can prove it. You can say the thing you're not allowed to say, Dave.
This is starting to sound like it sounded like the Bill Grundy Sex Pistols interview. I'm not going to be coerced into saying something that I shouldn't.
You already have.
Really wouldn't. Okay. All I want, honestly,
there's a room somewhere.
I wish everyone in the whole world could get on and there was peace.
Of course you do, Dave. Of course you do, but you want to say things about Muslims that you're not allowed to say. How does that make the world more peaceful?
You've taken you've taken it out of context.
I've repeated your own words back to you. You told me you're cross about some paint on a wall in Manchester because you feel that society would judge you unfairly if you said something horrible about Muslims. Not horrible, James. You can't say anything about Muslims.
I didn't say horrible.
So tell me the thing you can't say. What's the thing you can't say?
Okay, I think we'll leave it here, James.
Go on, Dave. No, seriously, what's the thing?
People who get my point.
What is the point, Dave? Say the thing you can't say, Dave.
I'm not going to, James.
Okay, but it's not horrible. It's not horrible in any way, shape, or form.
No, it's not.
And you're still cross about some paint. You're still cross about some paint on a wall in Manchester.
Because it's wrong.
Right.
In my day, that was called graffiti, and you would get, up against the school board for it.
The graffiti would be the poem that was put there in the first place, which you rang in to say should have been left there, and now you're making a case against graffiti. On a scale of 1 to 10, Dave, how well do you think this call has gone for you?
It's not about how it's gone for me.
I think you'll find it is, pal. It's 11:47, where we are, well, I suppose, slightly reluctantly, just suggesting that no deal looks more likely now than it has looked at any point since before the referendum. And for me, the tipping point was that appearance by Theresa May before the Westminster Liaison Select Committee, where Yvette Cooper simply asked her quite straightforwardly to explain a relatively important part of her Chequers plan, and she couldn't. So the plan that's rubbish, because it had to be rubbish, isn't understood by the person in charge. And what happens if there's no plan? No deal. I think no deal is the child of no plan, and it's now clear that there was never any plan. In fact, it's so clear that there was never any plan, people who encouraged you to leave are now trying to blame people who encouraged you to remain for the absence of a plan. Joby is in Guildford. Joby, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you, all right?
All good, mate.
Yeah. This is really getting to you, this whole subject. I listen to it every single day.
I'll be all right, but it's people less well off than me that are going to be screwed, mate, and that's the heart of my politics.
I think you're probably right. I think we're heading for no deal, or pretty much staying in all but name.
No, we can't do that. There's no such thing as staying in all but name. If we leave the customs union and the single market, there's no deal.
Well, then I reckon you're probably right. I reckon we're heading for no deal. I don't think Theresa May has got any kind of idea of what deal she wants to go for. I don't think she'll probably try and get as close as she can to staying in. I do believe that. I mean, She
can't, mate.
She can't stay. I know she can't stay in there. Everybody keeps saying stay in, have another referendum, stay in. But is that possible? I mean, you say that you know all your facts and you look into it. Is it possible to call it off and stay in now, or
to call off the whole thing, to withdraw Article 50?
Yeah, is it possible to do that? I mean,
the people that wrote Article, there's some debate. I'll go with Lord Kerr, who wrote Article 50. He says it is reversible. It's not a 100% cast iron conclusion, but he probably knows more about the workings of Article 50, being the bloke that wrote it, than. Well, actually, that's not fair. I'm sure Nadine Dorries has got a much better understanding of Article 50 than Lord Kerr. But there'd have to be some sort of election or some. I mean, if Theresa May unilaterally decided to call the whole thing off and pull out, God knows what would happen.
I've got one question I really would love to ask you, if possible.
Yeah, of course. If I can answer.
The question is, I mean, I listened to you, but the question is, James, do you think it is actually possible that we could ever, I don't mean will it happen, I mean, is it a possibility, is it feasible that we could actually ever leave the EU? Before the referendum or now, do you think that there is a scenario that we could actually leave?
I think we're going to. I think we're going to leave with no deal.
But you mean with no deal? That's what I mean. Do you think that when we joined the EU, we went into the EU, and we've got to the point now where we're so entangled in it that it isn't actually possible to leave? Do you think that the old leaving thing, we either leave with no deal and it's disastrous?
Well, I think that was the problem of the rhetoric, because there is no deal that's better than what we've currently got. And you can prove that because you have to write down the terms of a deal. You don't have to write down the terms of a no deal. So because I think the unicornists have won, I think the unicornists, the people promising you untold riches, sunny uplands, a solution coming over the hill, but they can't tell you what it is, there comes a point where the other side can't win anymore because they can only write down. This is what happened at Chequers. They finally had to write it down, at which point the real charlatans, Davis and Johnson, have to walk away because they can't pretend anymore within the cabinet that anything could have gone differently. So I don't think there's a choice now between no deal or staying in.
Well, I think, to be honest, I think that's the problem, that you don't quite get the mentality.
Oh, I get it better than anyone, mate.
If you say that we can't possibly leave the EU, we're so entangled that they've got...
No, I didn't say that.
Now. Yeah, but that's what I mean. Do you think there is any possibility, any way that we could leave, or are we actually...
We're going to leave. There's no way we could... There's no way we could leave the European Union with a better situation than being in it. So we are going to leave, and we're going to be much worse off.
Yeah, but that's the thing, because there's no possibility of being able to leave with a better deal. The people that are voting to leave, they don't care if they're Western.
Oh, I know, because they're going to get blue passports.
Well, yeah, but it's that whole thing of, it's like having a child and telling... I mean, listen, with me and you disagree on so many levels of so many things, but I listen to you every day. I respect that you're very...
You can't listen that carefully if you still disagree with me.
Well, no, I do. It's political disagreement on a lot of things. But I just think the mentality of when they say to people, we are now part of the EU, we can never leave unless we want to suffer. I think that it doesn't matter what the option is. People are still going to want to leave. Don't get me wrong, I don't think we're going to leave. I personally think that the whole summer will be a campaign of how bad
why do you use a word like campaign, you see? Again, I mean... I heard
it on your radio station this morning. Someone was saying that
it's not a campaign.
Go on a campaign this summer to...
Yes, but campaign is you make it sound like it's a sort of political ambition. It is a warning. She is explaining to 250,000 small businesses what is going to happen to them if we leave without a deal. It's not a campaign. It's information. A campaign is vote for me or don't vote for me, or don't vote for him and don't vote for her. This is literally a quarter of a minute. I mean, this is why I get slightly frustrated. I appreciate the compliment, but quite how you could listen to this programme about Brexit and disagree with me about anything is beyond me, mate, because all we've done is facts and details and numbers, and every single prediction has come true, and the argument that you were going to be able to get this or get that or get the other has been completely blown apart. The people that made the promises have all run away. way, and you're still sitting there saying, yeah, but I hate the EU because it's going to be really hard to leave.
Well, I never said that.
No, but you described the mentality that I don't understand. I understand it better than anybody does.
Yeah, but I said I disagree with you on so many levels. Not that I hate the EU, and I didn't say that at all.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, there is no way that all of these people are ever going to say, if they got the thought in their head that we can't leave...
I agree, mate. I agree with you. That's why I think we're going for no deal.
You're having every day I listen to you, the thing is, what you do, I talk to people after listening, you're having a reverse sort of effect on people here, because the more you tell them that they can't, and the more you give them the fact, the more... So it's going to be worse.
Yes, but you see, that's the problem that you have. If you're dealing with people that don't understand issues, you either try to help them understand, or you feed their ignorance. And you're right. Sometimes when you try...
But the votes are all worth the same, James.
Mate, I'm not arguing with you about anything. But I have a choice. I have a choice, and I had a choice at the beginning of my career. Do I give people what they need to have a better understanding of the issues, or do I feed their ignorance with fear and scaremongering?
That one question, you think that, apart from leaving on a no-deal scenario, or leaving...
There's no deal she can sell to the people you've just been describing. There's no deal she can sell to them.
So effectively you're saying that it has got to the point now that we are so entangled in it, we either stay or we
I don't know why you use a word like entangled. It's a bit like... It's a bit like
well, it's obviously small changes over time. No,
it's not. You need to think of it differently. You need to think of it as a club of which you are a member. And if you leave, you won't be a member of any club anymore. That's not the club's fault.
I understand.
That's your fault for leaving.
If you've got to say for instance, a Sky subscription, and you ring Sky and say I want to cancel my subscription.
Yes.
And they say, well, we'll lower your price, we'll give you more channels.
Yeah, but you've missed a crucial point already.
What's that?
Sky are only going to try and fight for your continued custom if they've got rivals.
Yeah, but if it's any club, if it's anything...
No, again, listen, Joby, mate, listen.
I understand that mentality.
Don't listen then. That's fine.
No, I will listen.
All right, so here's the thing. The only circumstances in which Sky have to fight for your custom is if they've got attractive rivals. So I ring up Sky and I say, I don't want to pay my subscription anymore. And they think, oh, heck, he's gone with Virgin, or he's gone with... or he's happy with his Netflix or whatever it might be. So they then try to make their membership more attractive than the other memberships I'm weighing up. Under this current situation with regards to EU membership, you ring up Sky and you say, I'm thinking of cancelling my subscription, and then there's nothing on your television.
Yes, but you see...
Don't say yes, but. Don't say yes, but. Don't say yes, but. The idea that it's like Sky is a beautiful illustration of why we're going to end up with no deal. Because people still think when they phone up Sky and cancel it, they'll be able to choose from a dizzying array of other alternatives. There aren't any alternatives and options, mate. When you cancel your Sky subscription, your TV goes off forever.
Yes. And you go to Virgin, you pay more, you get less channels. But
no, you don't even go to Virgin, mate, because that's not no deal.
Yeah, but if they're... Oh, you don't have any... You go back to the radio, which is good. We can listen to you all day. But,
that should put people... If that doesn't swing them, mate, nothing will.
If they tell them that they can't leave, this is the old scenario.
I know, we're back to where we started. Yeah. I'm not arguing with you, but we're probably going to describe these people differently. I'm going to describe them as furiously stubborn. And they are being told again and again and again not to punch themselves in the face. But because you're somehow telling them they're not allowed to punch themselves in the face, they feel that they're being restricted. They feel that I'm tying their hands behind their back and stopping them from punching themselves in the face. And the only way you're going to make them realise that it hurts is to let them do it. And that's why no deal now, to me, looks more than likely. Paul's in Birmingham. Paul, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Just one central point, really, which I think is a big reality at the heart of Brexit that rarely gets talked about. It's a massive commercial negotiation at the heart of Brexit, £40 billion. Yeah. What does it buy us? And like any large-scale commercial negotiation, the only time that gets sorted out properly is in the last few days and hours before the deadline. David Davis made this point
You're talking about leaving the European Union rather than negotiating a trade treaty?
Both.
No, because the trade treaties... Have you seen the Japanese-EU trade treaty? Have you actually seen it physically?
No, I haven't, no.
OK, it's the size of a phone box on paper when you line up all the books, and there's no way that was cobbled together in the last few hours, mate. They take years and years and years to do. And what worries me about the analogy with commercial negotiations and Brexit is that they are two completely different things. Because if you're doing a commercial negotiation and you walk away, you keep what you've got. You keep the business and the arrangements and the trade that you've got before the negotiation started. Brexit's not like that.
James, no, it is, James, in one crucial respect, because the only time we get any commercial traction for our money is when we're bang near the deadline and the 27 EU countries and the EU representations in the negotiations realise that they might not get that money, and that's when they'll come to the table and start respecting some of our red lines.
For example, but they already respect our red lines. So what do you think the EU could do, Paul, that would make Theresa May's situation easier?
I think we've been architects of our own downfall.
I'm going to be a bit hectoring because I'm a little short of time. I need you to tell me the things that you think the EU is going to concede on as a result of time passing.
Okay, well, I believe that in the days before the deadline, they will consider and agree a Canada-type deal, a free trade Canada-type deal, with all the other ancillary issues and difficulties like Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland border, that will have to be sorted out in the transition period.
How will it be sorted out? Because you know they're not going to sign any deal until Ireland is sorted out. They've been absolutely adamant about that.
Well, I think it's
so. I mean, much as I envy your optimism,
£40 billion.
Yeah, but you can keep saying that
in the days and hours before the deadline. That will fall away.
Yeah, but the thing is, mate, when I asked you what they're going to do, you said something that's impossible.
No, you're giving us a Canada-style free trade deal.
They can't give us a trade deal until the Irish border is sorted. That is one of the few things on which everybody can agree.
I don't understand why any technical reason why the Irish border issue can't be sorted out in the transition period with a long stop.
The EU negotiator Michel Barnier expressed serious concerns about the white paper. It would mean a major risk of fraud, he said. But for him, the urgent matter is the withdrawal agreement and ensuring no hard Irish border immediately after Brexit. So both sides need to agree a so-called backstop.
All 27 member states insist on this. Why? Because we are committed to protecting Ireland and Northern Ireland against the consequences of Brexit and to preserve the Good Friday Agreement in all its dimensions.
In Belfast, speaking against the unusual backdrop of a demonstration in line of sight by Sinn Féin, Mrs May again rejected the Commission's existing backstop plans. She says they'd involve a new border between Britain and Northern Ireland down the Irish Sea.
Under their proposal, Northern Ireland would be represented in trade negotiations and in the World Trade Organization on tariffs by the European Commission, not its own national government. The economic and constitutional dislocation of a formal third country customs border within our own country is something I will never accept, and I believe no British Prime Minister could ever accept.
But the Irish government say that on this thorny issue of a backstop for the Irish border, the ball's in Britain's court.
So we need to see a wording that is legally operable so that we can get some confidence into the system of negotiation, that the Irish backstop will be there and will be able to function to reassure people that there's a fallback position or there's an insurance mechanism, if you like, to ensure that under any circumstances, really, there won't be border infrastructure re-emerging on the island of Ireland.
Thank you.
And as both sides step up plans for no deal, they've only got a few weeks to sort it all out.
Because the thing that, well, number one, she's ruled out the backstop, not the long stop. Number two, it was agreed in December of last year that there will be no trade deal until the Irish border situation is solved. And number three, the Good Friday Agreement demands identical trading situations on both sides of the Irish border. It's impossible. It's not just like hard or tricky or a bit political. It's categorically impossible. So what I'd like you to do, we've only got a minute left, if you had to point to your biggest influences politically or the people who have informed your thinking the most, who would they be? Who's led you to this ridiculous place?
Well, I'm an old-fashioned Burkean conservative, so I'd say Edmund Burke.
Well, Edmund Burke and Brexit are a couple of hundred years apart. So in terms of you still clinging to the idea that there's a unicorn on the horizon with regard to Brexit, leading you, an intelligent man who can quote Edmund Burke, to argue the polar opposite of reality, who is it? Who is it that's done this to you?
You're very eloquent, but your characterisation is seriously mistaken.
Yeah, so just answer the question. Who's done it to you? Who's led you to a place where you come on national radio to argue that the solution will be something that...
Edmund Burke.
Oh, all right. So remind me, Edmund, what chapter was it he wrote about Brexit?
Well, no, of course it was a different time talking about...
So when it comes to Brexit, who made you think that the impossible was possible?
I'm sorry, but I just don't accept that characterisation. The British government...
So when it was agreed in December that there can be no trade negotiation completed until, and not even begun, actually, it can't even be... It can't even be...
We should never have agreed that.
No,
we should never have agreed
Paul,
that.
that's a very different thing. Okay, mate, the more you talk, the worse it gets, all right? Because you are now arguing that the thing we agreed to in December didn't happen.
No, I'm not saying it didn't
Yes,
happen.
you are.
No, I'm saying it's a mistake for us to agree to it.
Right, so it did happen, and we now work against the backdrop of something that happened, and what happened was, at the EU's behest, we agreed there cannot be a trade agreement until the Irish border problem is solved, and your solution to the current situation is that we'll sign a trade agreement without having solved the Irish border. You are literally arguing that night is day, and I'm just interested, regardless of your Edmund Burke enthusiasms, I'm interested in who we should hold responsible for you having been led into such an idiotic position.
All I'm saying, in essence, we're all on the Brexit train. Whether you like it or not, Leave or Remainer, we're all on the Brexit train. And rather than argue about the scenery that's passing...
We're arguing about reality, Paul. I live in it. You're still clinging to an alternative. So I'll ask you again. We agreed in December that the Irish border solution has to be in place and approved before any trade agreement can be contemplated, let alone signed. That is reality, okay? You still cling to the idea that an alternative reality exists where we can sign a Canada... You can sign a Canada trade... You're just doing it again. Why can't you just say a name? Just say a name of someone. Who do you hold responsible for having done this to you?
Theresa May, in terms
Theresa May was a Remainer, Paul. It's 12:17.
Yes.
This is the Department for Exiting the European Union's own analysis of the current options. No deal. WTO rules sees GDP go down by 8%, £158 billion less per year, 2.8 million fewer jobs. Yeah, Project Fit. No, this is the department that David Davis was running until last week. Comprehensive free trade agreement, which would see us outside the single market and the customs union. 5% lower GDP, £99 billion less per year, 1.75 million fewer jobs. I think that's off the table now because of Ireland. Personally, I really do. I think that the comprehensive free trade agreement, given what Theresa May's just said, just went out of, I think the light at the end of that particular tunnel just went out. This would work. We stay in the single market through EEA. We, of course, have no say in rulemaking, but we would be better insulated against economic damage. Problem with that, of course, is that it would involve retaining freedom of movement of people, which the kind of racist lobby aren't going to go for. So there you have GDP down by 2%, £39 billion less a year, 700,000 job losses, or Remain, which sees GDP grow at its current rates and no impact on jobs. But that is only the Department for Exiting the European Union's analysis, all right? So don't think that that's some sort of Project Fear propaganda. So I'm looking for reasons to be cheerful. And at the moment, I haven't got any, because I think we're either looking at no deal or no Brexit, and no deal seems to me now, particularly after what's just happened in Belfast, seems to me to be considerably more likely. But again, for the millionth time since June of 2016, I really, really hope I'm wrong. John's in Croydon. John, what would you like to say?
James, good morning. I had to turn off and talk to you because you've just made me so angry this morning, and I can't understand. I'm a big fan of yours. about how you've got Brexit so wrong. But people don't seem to understand how negotiating works. You go in hard, you threaten all sorts of things, and you come out with a deal.
And if you don't get a deal, if you don't... John, hang on a minute, because this is, I think, perhaps what you don't understand about me. You go in really, really hard, you threaten all sorts, and you come out with a deal. What if you don't? What do you go back to if there's no deal?
Okay. Let me tell you why there will be...
No, please answer my question first.
Well, I'm trying to answer it.
So because you're comparing the Brexit negotiations to other negotiations, and I think that's a valid position to begin from. But what you have to do to sustain that comparison is to tell me what happens in other negotiations when you walk away. What do you walk back to?
Well, that's the second thing I wanted to say, but can I just say...
No, I just want you to answer my question first, John, because I'm trying to make you less cross. So when you're having these negotiations that you're comparing Brexit to, and you walk away from the negotiations, because, as you say, that is the threat that you use as a lever to soften the position of the people you're negotiating with, when you walk away from all of the other negotiations that you're referring to, what do you walk back to?
Okay, this is the plan that you are asking for, okay?
Are you going to answer my question or not?
No, I am. I don't want a no deal. It'll be a disaster for everybody.
That's not an answer to the question I asked. What do you walk back to? Every other negotiation, whether you're buying a car or a house or whether you're opening a new factory, what do you revert to when you walk away from the negotiations?
Okay, you revert to a situation where you can do your own deal with every country around the world.
No, you don't. When you walk away from a negotiation, in all ordinary circumstances, you revert back to exactly where you were before the negotiation started. So you go back to your old house. You have the trading arrangements that were in place before the negotiation started. You keep your old car. We walk away from Brexit with no deal. We are the only country on the planet that has no trading arrangement in place with any other trading partner.
Okay, James, we are. It's not the same because we are leaving the EU. So you can't say that no deal means we go back to where we are now.
Exactly, which is why you can't compare the EU negotiations to any other negotiation, which is why your central beginning point has already fallen to pieces. But tell me what it is I don't understand.
Well, first of all, there will be a deal because the EU has a 90 to 100 billion pound trade surplus with the UK. So when the boss of Mercedes phones Merkel...
Oh, my God, we're doing the German car company. You're not doing the German car companies, John.
Well, but because they're going to say to Angela...
I'm being rude.
Do you want us to make 10,000 people redundant? Okay. That's why they'll do a deal, because they've got millions of jobs dependent on the 90 billion pound trade surplus with the UK.
Okay.
And the other thing about the EU is they only ever do deals at 1 minute to midnight on the 29th of March.
The Japanese deal has taken 5 years.
Well,
it was completed. But you keep saying things that are really easy to prove wrong.
Well, how can you prove it wrong?
It took 5 years to do.
Well, and I'll tell you what, that's why it's going to be so good to come out, because every time they do it...
So now we're not claiming that they do it all in the last couple of minutes. We're saying it's good that we're coming out because it takes so long. So literally, John, you've rung in to explain to me what it is that I don't understand, and in the space of 30 seconds, you've gone from saying the deals are always done at the very, very last minute. I point out, actually, they take a really long time, and you come back and say, oh, well, that's a good reason for leaving then. They take a really long time. I have barely contributed to this conversation, and you've just completely contradicted yourself.
No, you're talking about a political negotiation.
Oh, my days.
Which is different from a trade negotiation.
We can't even begin the trade negotiation until the political negotiation is finished.
Yes, but there are reasons to do with the trade surplus and so on where it will be suicide. The EU will do a deal on Ireland because...
What will it look
like? Got a 90... Sorry?
What will the deal be? What works?
I won't be party to the negotiations.
But what is a deal that can simultaneously observe single market exit and the requirements of the Good Friday Agreement? Because, John, it doesn't exist. So you can tell me... No, John, you've just done it again. You've just done it again. You've just said to me, this thing will happen. I've proved to you and shown to you why it can't, and now you're just saying, I believe that it will. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know who's going to do it. I don't know how it's going to happen. But I'm supremely confident that it will happen.
But in any negotiation, you trade concessions.
Oh, but we've already established, the first thing we established was that this negotiation is like no other, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So when you say in any negotiation you do X, that is already a busted flush of a point.
But you're assuming that the EU won't move and won't soften. They will. I mean, we have gone in much too softly with them.
But you can keep saying these things. It doesn't make them true. You're familiar with what the German car industry has said about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit in October of last year.
Well, it's obvious what's going to happen. If we are their biggest exporter...
No, I'm asking if you know what they've said, the Federation of German Industries.
I don't know precisely.
Well, then you're very lucky, because I can tell you, after 4 rounds of negotiations, German industry looks with concern at the progress of the Brexit negotiations. The British government is lacking a clear concept, despite talking a lot, and they urged their members to prepare for what they call an off-the-cliff Brexit. That is the Confederation of German Industry. The head of the German automotive industry said something very similar 3 months previously. German companies with a presence in Britain and Northern Ireland must now make provisions for the serious case of a very hard exit. Anything else would be naive. This is the German business that you say is going to stop Angela Merkel from continuing on the path that she's on. The people you're saying are going to do that, they publicly say the precise opposite, John. The precise opposite of what you think is what they're actually saying.
Yeah, but I don't think they are thinking about no deal. They are assuming that sensible heads will get round the table and a deal will be done. And I'll have a bet with you, James.
John, they're not, mate. You need to listen to the German companies with a presence in Britain and Northern Ireland must now make provisions for the serious case of a very hard exit. Anything else would be naive. The aim of the task force is to identify, this is what they've set up, the people that you think are going to put the brakes on Brexit. The aim of the task force is to identify potential and acute risks arising from Britain's departure and to present constructive proposals for solutions. Airbus, Deutsche Bank, all of these companies are on the same page, and you're still clinging to the idea that they're somehow going to be able to conjure up a unicorn-flavoured trade agreement because they're frightened of losing British business. Where have you been for the last 2 years?
Okay, let's agree to disagree about...
No, this isn't agreeing to disagree. That would be like saying, let's agree to disagree about whether it's raining or not outside. Put your head out of the window, John, feel the rain on your head, and then come back inside and say, well, let's agree to disagree about whether or not it's raining. These are all facts. You rang me to say German industry won't let X happen. I have shown you German industry is already preparing for X happening. So we can't agree to disagree any more than we could agree to disagree about whether the moon is made of cheese or moon rock. You stick to believing it's made of cheese. I'm never going to agree to disagree because I know it's made of moon rock.
Can I just tell you what I think will happen if a no deal happens?
If you must.
Okay. People assume that we're falling off a cliff. But there was a wonderful article in the Sunday Times colour mag by our chief negotiator about all the deals that we're going to be able to do when we're free.
Yeah.
The EU, every time it tries to do a deal, which is always goods-orientated, has to take into account the slowest country of the 27. When we are free, we can do service-based deals, which are our great strength. We have the world's spoken language, we have the world's computer language, we have the most...
Well, we had all of that before we left. I mean, you're really sitting here telling me that a Brexit benefit is that people speak English.
And I know you like facts, James, so let me give you 2 facts.
Go on then, John.
1.8% of insurance premiums in the world are done in India, but they are 18% of the world's population.
Yeah.
And it's very similar in China.
Yeah, that changes everything.
Doing services.
That changes everything.
We'll be able to do deals in China and India that we currently cannot do, which are done by us by the EU, who are not.
Why is German trade with China 5 times more than ours?
I don't know. I don't know.
But you told me we can't, as an EU company, we can't do trade with China on that kind of scale. Why is Germany doing it?
Manufacturing.
Why is Germany doing it? Why is Germany doing 5 times more trade than us?
Because it's manufacturing deals which we're not strong at. 80% of our economy is.
But we can do, if they can do manufacturing deals, John, we can do service deals. So why is Germany doing 5 times more trade than us?
Well, we can't. We can't do service deals because the EU do it on our behalf.
No, they don't.
Singapore has 3 times.
No, John, but you're saying things that aren't true again.
They are true.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Have a great weekend.
I know he's a moron.